Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Oh my gosh, my name is Becca and I'm so glad you're with me today. Today we're going to be talking about some houseplant techniques that I have moved on from, and this is basically just like houseplant care things that I just don't do anymore, either because I found that it's not effective or actually helpful, or I just don't do it anymore for some unexplained reason. I'm super excited to chat with you. I actually didn't think I'd be able to film this video because there's currently people replacing our upstairs floor and it's been so loud, but they just went on lunch. So I am filming. I know that nobody really cares how I look in my videos, but I have to say, I've been wearing this beanie for like a couple days, and so there's no going back at this point, and I didn't think I'd have the opportunity to film this video, but like I really would like to keep on my schedule. So you're getting exactly what I look like today. I did not doll myself up. I'm wearing an outfit that I found in my laundry room and the beanie that I've been wearing with my pajamas for the last 2 days. Awesome. Okay, let's get into it. The first houseplant technique that I have moved on from is misting. So I used to be a big mister, and the reason for it wasn't necessarily because I thought that it would increase the humidity, but in my mind, it was something that I could do for my plants that was a little bit more passive, that I wouldn't be bothering them so much with. Because normally when you're fresh into houseplants, you want to fuss with your plants, you want to mess with them, you want to like tweak them, and I found myself watering more often than I needed to. I just was like doting over my plants. That kind of stopped once I had more plants because I didn't have time to be focused on like every little thing on every single plant. So that sort of helped, like having more plants made me a little bit less of a helicopter plant parent because I had to spread my efforts a little bit more. But yeah, one of the things that I did to sort of curb my need to be caring for the plants constantly was misting. So every morning I wanted to do something for my plants, so I would just mist everything. And what I found is, number one, people will say misting increases humidity, and it does, but only for like a few minutes, and that's not going to be a long-lasting affecting change for your houseplants. Houseplants need consistent humidity to really make a change in their appearance and in their growth. And misting your plant, you'd have to be like in a constant state of misting your plant. Like every 10 minutes, get up and remist your plant. Or like anytime the water dries up, start misting, which is not realistic for anybody. And constant misting is not even a good thing in itself because that can also introduce bacteria that wouldn't be there normally. And I also found that when I misted my plants, they would get dusty so much faster. I'm not exactly sure why that would happen. Maybe the water would like, I don't know, it wouldn't like draw in the dust, but it's just something that I noticed. Like I would have to clean my plants way more often when I was misting. And if you're not using distilled water, you could over time have like hard water buildup on your leaves, which like isn't the end of the world. You can definitely get it off with some like lemon juice and water, but it's just not like something that you should have to add to your routine just because you're misting because you think it's doing something when it really isn't, you know? So that's why I don't do it anymore. By all means, it's probably the least like bad thing you could do for your plants. Like there's definitely things out there that are much worse to do to your plants, but I'm just gonna say, if you are misting because you think that you're adding humidity, you're not. You're just sort of like spinning your wheels because it's not adding humidity long term, which is what the plant would actually need. Don't go and throw away your spray bottles because you can use those for pest solutions. So if you're ever mixing like sulfur in water or rubbing alcohol dish soap in water to do spider mites or flat mites or whatever it is that you're combating, if you buy like a concentrate of Jack's Dead Bug Brew, Jack's Dead Bug, is that what? Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. I knew that was off. You can use that to dilute it down and put it in a spray bottle and then use the spray bottle to clean your leaves with the solution. I find that that is the best way to use a spray bottle, so you don't need to throw them away. I mean, if you have one of those fancy ones, I personally wouldn't use one of those like fancy misters to use like Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew, but if you want to do that, you can. It's all about your aesthetic and what you want it to look like. but I just have some like utility spray bottles that I keep, and I put my pest solutions in it and I just label the bottle so I know what's in it. Okay, this next one is a rather recent change, and that is watering all of my plants in the sink. I used to be a huge proponent for taking every plant to the sink, and I was always like, if you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong, okay? So I will say, number one, I do still believe that you need to be thoroughly watering your plants through. Like, in my opinion, with the soil that I use, just putting enough water in the plant to fill up the saucer is not enough water for that plant at all. Now, it depends on the soil that you use, of course, but because I use De La tanks like exclusively, it's very chunky and water does run through it pretty quickly. So if you're using a soil mix that is like much more dense and it takes the water longer to get through the soil, maybe that would be okay. But I just find that the plant needs to be flushed most of the time when you're watering it, especially if you're using tap water. You don't want stuff from your water just like sitting in your pot, because that can also cause issues. So what I do is I don't water with distilled water, I use tap water, but I just make sure to flush the plant several times. So if I'm not using the sink, how am I doing that without flooding my plant room? Well, I have a plant-a-potty. It's basically a little lid for a 5-gallon bucket, and there's so many ways that you could, you know, DIY something similar on your own. I've actually made a watering table sort of inspired by the plant-a-potty slash this other watering table that I use over my sink called the Plantfolio. And by combining those two ideas, I came up with this big watering table that I can water my huge Monstera Adansonii with. But basically, I am not doing the trek from my plant room to my kitchen anymore, watering the plants that live in here, because it's just a really big hassle, and watering all of these plants is already a huge inconvenience, if I may say. I mean, I got myself into this mess. I am aware that I have a pretty large houseplant collection, all things considered. I have like 130 plants probably at this point. So it's a big responsibility, and when most of those plants are in one room, the watering tends to all fall on the same day, which is really a bummer. I posted a video a couple days ago, I think, or maybe you're gonna see it soon, of me watering this plant room, and there's just like several moments where I'm just sitting there like zoning out because I'm waiting for the water to be done draining. But I would still rather do that and know that my plants are getting an adequate amount of water rather than just filling up the saucer and like hoping for the best. Basically, if you have something for the water to overflow into out of the pot, and so that you can run several rounds of water through the pot, I think that is the best, and that doesn't have to be in the sink. So again, I used to be big on doing this in the sink, but now I have the plant-a-potty, I have my specific watering table that I built that I can use over a bucket to have the same experience in the sink, but in the plant room where I don't have to take everything in there. And it's also nice because I can just cart around my 5-gallon bucket into each room in my home and water the plants right there. So I'm just literally pulling it off the shelf and putting it down like, you know, a couple feet, and then I'm watering, and then within a few minutes I can just put it back up. And I think that something that I often overlook is that there are people who are disabled and are not able to like lift their pots and move them around, or maybe they're older, and that's not always possible. So if you are a person who waters your plants in place and it's going great for you, then keep doing what you're doing. Like, you don't need to do what I'm doing. This is just what I have found is most effective for me and my plants, and I am able to move them around, so I do. But if you can't or you don't want to, that's fine. I always say, take what you hear online and add things to your fruit basket from everything that people say, and then you have your fruit basket of plant knowledge. And it's fun because you have all this different fruit, all this different knowledge from all these different people, and you create your own basket that you like and works for you. So if there's something that I say that you don't like, just like toss it. It's a rotten fruit for you and you don't need to keep it. But if you hear something that I like, pick it and take a bite. Use it if you want, share it with your friends, but no need to like follow everything I say to a T, because everybody's houseplant experience is going to be unique. All of our homes are unique, all of our plants are unique, and I think that it would be kind of silly to do everything that I do exactly, although I would be flattered. You don't need to do that, and it's more important that you take what I say and adapt it for yourself so that you can have your own plant philosophy that is inspired by possibly me and others, and hopefully some like, you know, science journal-y type of resources as well. Because as I've said multiple times. I'm not a botanist, horticulturalist, nothing like that. I'm not formally trained in this. I don't want to be. I am an English person. I like reading and I like writing, and I just happen to like plants. You know what I mean? So I definitely do look to the professionals for information and like news in the plant world, but I am oftentimes just going off of what works for me. And I think that's also super important to note when you are online looking at people's videos and articles and TikToks and everything. And I guess that's like an additional thing that I don't do anymore, is I don't like take someone's word as like Bible. Definitely create your own techniques and try out what people say online, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, you know? Okay, so the next point that I have planned actually is a foliar spray for Hoyas. There's this orchid mist that you can use on your Hoya, and it's a foliar fertilizer because Hoya, being epiphytes, they take in nutrients also through their leaves. And I think somewhere along the line of my move out here to Missouri, I just forgot that I could do that. And I know that it's not available in every country, and so I have before told somebody online what the ratio was of like the NPK. The 3 numbers on your fertilizer is called NPK, and that's the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that is in your fertilizer. And so based on that, they just found one that was very similar and turned it into a foliar spray, or it already was a foliar spray. I'm not exactly sure, but basically it's a very gentle fertilizer that you spray onto the leaves of your Hoya, and it's made for orchids, but it works for Hoya too. And it just sort of helps give the plant more nutrients so that it can grow more. I mean, it's good for your plants to get nutrients. It's good to be fertilizing your plants. Sometimes people stop fertilizing in the winter. I will keep fertilizing if I notice that a plant is actually putting out growth still, but since this room gets down to like the 60s, I don't usually see a ton of growth through the winter time, but there are some plants that will continue, so I'll make sure that I'm fertilizing those ones. When I lived in Tucson, I used the foliar spray year round because I didn't really experience like a change in seasons like I do here in Missouri. You can use it a couple times a week, but I will say don't use it if the plant is in like direct sun. So if the plant sees the sun and the leaves are getting like sunlight on them, like direct sunlight on them, don't spray until later when the sunlight is not on the leaves, because I think that some people experienced some burning when there was like direct sun on it when the spray was on it. It's not something that I use anymore, as is the point of this entire video, but it is something that I would consider using again. But honestly, I think that a lot of the reason that my Hoyas stopped growing is because they had flat mites and I just didn't know, because since I have sprayed them with the sulfur spray, I've seen new growth on almost all of them, and I really think that it's just because they had flat mites, and it was like a slow, insidious thing where you obviously you can't see flat mites because they're microscopic. Sometimes plants will just look stable even though they're like being eaten from the inside out, and you just never know. Okay, the next plant technique that I don't do anymore is using humidifiers, and this is actually a recent decision. So this is like a multiple reason thing. So the first reason I don't use humidifiers anymore is I never really noticed that it was very effective anyway. So what's the point of spinning my wheels and spending the money and the energy filling up the humidifier every day, sometimes twice a day, if nothing has really changed? Because I would set my humidifier to be like 75%. I have the Levoit humidifier and it's pretty nice. I mean, it's like the 5.5 liter humidifier. It's not a top load. If it was a top load, maybe I would be more interested in using it, but even so, it goes through basically the entire tank of water in a day because it's running all day long to keep this room moist. And I never noticed a change on my moisture meter. Like, if anything, it was like 2%. You know what I mean? Like the hydrometer I have set up in the same spot year round, and I never noticed a change in here ever. So that's probably the number one reason why I'm not using a humidifier anymore. I will say that the plants like directly around the humidifier probably did benefit from having that moisture, because if the humidifier like stream is right next to a plant, that plant is obviously going to be like wet all day long. So it's kind of like misting it all day long, but unless you're like directly around the humidifier, I just don't see how it was really helping all that much, and it's just not worth the stress and the time spent. And I actually did water delivery from a local water company. I don't remember what it was called. I think it starts with a C. But I did water delivery, and that made it significantly easier to actually get the water here, because carrying around those 5-gallon jugs is so annoying. They are so heavy, and filling them, loading them in your car, and then loading them into your house, and then actually tipping them over and loading up your humidifier. It's a whole thing, and honestly, I was sick of it. So I'm not doing it this year, and I'm gonna see what happens. I am going to have access to the greenhouse, which will hopefully have quite a bit of humidity going on. We will just have to see what this winter brings. I really don't know what the conditions are gonna be like in there, but I do know that I just am over using the humidifier because I don't think that it really does anything. And you have to make sure that it stays very clean, because if not, you're putting like nasty stuff in the air that you are breathing and everyone else in your house is breathing. So unless you're willing to keep up with the upkeep of the humidifier, I don't think it's worth it. Okay, the last plant technique that I have moved on from is aerating my soil with a chopstick. And I did this all the time early on because my soil was so compacted and I felt like I really needed to. So basically what this is you have like a chopstick or a knitting needle or a stick, and you stick it down into your soil, and it's mainly just a way to create little tunnels so that water can infiltrate the soil a lot faster and more effectively, because soil when it's dry tends to be like a dry sponge where it's just like sticking together, and it takes a long time for the water to loosen it up. And I will say that since I started using De La tanks, that is like not an issue for me at all. The soil never compacts. So I don't know, like it was probably the soil that I was using. Like obviously I look back at the soil mix that I used to make like when I first started, it was basically just straight up like peat, Miracle-Gro, and I would put like a little bit of activated charcoal in it, and I was like, wow, I'm really doing the most here. Fast forward to years later, and like if I was to see the mix that I'm currently using back in the day, I think I would have been like, what? That is way too chunky. I do not need to be using that. But anyway, I digress. The reason that aerating your soil is not great is because, well, according to soil scientists, it basically breaks up the microbial activity happening in the soil. And that's basically like, our soil is a living, breathing thing. It is alive. And there are tiny microorganisms that are in the soil that are breaking it down and creating an environment that is alive. I mean, that's like a very simplified version of what's actually going on in there. That is my understanding, and if you want to learn more, there's probably lots of videos out there by people who know more. Actually, I have a couple on my channel from Shota from Tank's Green Stuff who came on and talked about soil, and there have been several videos where we've talked about like the micro stuff that happens in soil. So you can check those videos out if you want. I will have like my soil playlist linked down below if you're interested. Hopefully I've also put it up in the cards so you can click that too. So yeah, disturbing those microorganisms in your soil is not great, but also like actually sticking something into the soil, you're kind of going in blind and you could be damaging roots. And depending on how often you do this, that could be a problem. Definitely roots are pretty resilient, and there's so many roots in your pot most likely. So it's not always like, I never saw the root breakage to be like that big of a deal, because I don't know, they can grow more. But also I think one of the bigger reasons why people say not to do this is because it makes your soil break down faster, because you're sort of like chopping it up into smaller pieces way sooner than what would naturally occur if you just let the microorganisms take care of it in just like the natural way where you're not disturbing the soil. So if you do find that your soil is like rock hard, there's a few things that you can do to help out. So number one, probably the number one thing that I would say is to bottom water the plant. And I am not the biggest proponent for bottom watering. I never have been, but there are a lot of people out there who swear by it. So I'm not gonna say it doesn't work, because obviously it does. But what you can do is you can put the plant in like a little basin of water or in your sink and let the plant itself soak up the water to loosen up that soil. And once you let it sit there for up to a couple of hours, sometimes you will notice that the soil is much looser. And at that point, you can just put the plant back, or you can water from the top down to sort of remove all of the excess minerals and things that are in your tap water. That's usually the biggest issue with bottom watering, is if you do bottom water, you do still need to make sure that you top water every once in a while, because you need to flush out all of that stuff from sitting in your pot, because in the long term, I've heard that that can affect your plant. Again, I've never been a long-term bottom waterer, so I can't say from personal experience that I've ever experienced that, but yeah, I have heard stories, and so kind of have to go off of that for my own knowledge. And it was sort of a cautionary tale for me. I've never really been interested in bottom watering. I think that it takes too long, and I'm just like it's not for me, and that's totally fine. There's definitely houseplant techniques that I think everybody should try and see if it works out for them. And I will say, don't rule things out right away, because if you don't try things, you're never really gonna know if you like it or not, and if it is actually effective or not. And I will say I'm a little bit of a hypocrite when I say that. Because there's several things within plants that I'm like, absolutely not. Like the number one thing would probably be like soilless mediums, like semi-hydro with leca or pon. But I do have one plant in pon, and I'm experimenting. And it's not to say that I'm gonna transfer all of my plants into pon, but maybe if there are certain plants like my anthurium that would prefer pon, I'm going to look into that if this one is a success, because I want my plants to thrive at the end of the day. And if putting my anthurium in pon is gonna do that, well, I might be willing to try it out, you know? So definitely don't rule things out. I think it's good to try things to see if it works for you, because you might actually be surprised. And don't be afraid to move on from techniques that just don't feel good for you anymore. If there's something that a YouTuber recommends and you're like, okay, I tried it for a couple weeks and I just don't like that, then don't do it. You know, you can, like, even if you took that fruit and put it in your basket, you can toss it. It's fine. We will never know. Honestly, we will never know. If you take our advice, you don't like it, and you toss it, I will never know unless you tell me. And if you tell me in a kind way, I'm not going to be offended. You know what I mean? But if you tell me it's dumb, well, I might be a little sad, but that's fine. It's not about my feelings. So anyway, I'm getting off on another tangent about fruit baskets, and I really need to put out some sort of merch piece about fruit baskets, because I think that is like iconic, and I love that. It's like one of my favorite phrases that I've thought up. I don't know, I just think it's a really cool concept. So anyway, if anybody has any ideas, let me know if you like that idea. I don't know, maybe we can put something together. Okay. That's all for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. It was a bit chattier than I thought, because I was not expecting to be able to film this video today. So thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for pardoning my very fuzzy beanie in my outfit that does not make any sense. If you liked this video and found it informative, make sure to hit that subscribe button, maybe share my channel with a friend. We are kind of close to 100K, and when that happens, I think it's gonna be like the most exciting day ever. So if you want to help us get to that mile marker, or if you want to help us along the journey to 100K, definitely share my channel with your friends and make sure that you are subscribed. I would really appreciate it. Okay, you guys, I gotta go. I gotta stop talking. I gotta get some water. Goodbye.